everybody. I'm Sean Robinson.
I'm Carson Grubaugh. Welcome to Living the Line.
And today we're going to be talking to one of my favorite people, a person I have not seen in many, many years, Gina Siciliano. How you doing, Gina?
Good. Thanks, guys. How are you?
Good.
Great. Thanks
It
for
is,
being here.
Gina is a fantastic cartoonist who's been making, I mean, as long as I've known you, Gina, we knew each other, what, 3 or 4 years in
Yeah.
Seattle? Um, And the entire time that I knew you, I knew Gina as that person who was making awesome comics with a ballpoint pen. And then one time I got to go to your house and I saw these amazing oil paintings all over the wall, and stacked up and you know piled up on the walls and everything. And lo and behold, it turns an edition on a book about an oil painter. And I thought that was a really intriguing thing and was really excited when I got to pick up a copy of it, which you can do right now. I Know What I Am. The Life and Times of Artemisia
Yes, got
Gentileschi.
it.
Is
Wow.
that okay? So Gina, how long have you been working on this book?
So this book took about 7 years, and I can give you just the brief story of it.
Yeah.
I was doing a lot of like memoir comics when we were hanging out in Seattle around, I think you said 2012, somewhere around there. I knew about Artemisia Gentileschi at the time, and I had seen one of her pieces in Italy, one of the Judith Slang Holofernes paintings at the Uffizi in Florence. I had seen in 2007 after I got out of graduated art school, and I studied oil painting in art school. But I was doing it took, and like I knew I wanted to do something about Artemisia Gentileschi, but it took me a while to kind of be ready to take on a project like that.
Right.
So you helped me do Summertime, which was like sort of the sex, drugs, rock and roll comics that I was working on around that time. And then finally, I think it was right after I self-published Summertime that I started getting serious about doing I Know What I Am. And I spent the first year just doing research. Like I just read every book about that time period that I could find. And I've always worked at used bookstores. But at the time when I started, there wasn't a ton of information, about this obscure Italian painter. But I was just trying to figure out more about the context, so more about her time and place. So just learning everything I could about the Italian Baroque, essentially. And then I broke it into 3 parts. So I did the first part and the second part. And the first part is, the sort of the first section of her life, and then the second part has to do with this horrible assault that she lived through and this giant trial that took place in 1612. And then the last part of the book spans the rest of her career. So I did those first 2 parts and self-published them, similar to like how I did with Summertime.
Right.
And it did all ballpoint pen for all of it. There were just so many aspects of it that were outside of my comfort zone that I felt like the medium needed to at least be something I was really comfortable with. So did all ballpoint pen, and then and I was looking for publishers the whole time too. I was sending it out. No one cared. I mean, you know how this goes, And then when I got to the third last section of the book, I got a University of Washington library card. You can actually spend $100 and you can access this library. And that was a game changer. And so I took another year to just research for that third part, especially since in Rome and but not just Rome, but Florence, England, Venice, and then also Naples, especially. But having that University of Washington library card, I had a way more access to different kinds of more scholarly material. And so I was finally able to put that third part together, and then finally Fantagraphics kind of came around, and then and it was kind of like flirting with them, for a little bit, like, are they going to take this book? But Gay really liked it, which was just so great. And then with Fantagraphics, we did about a year of production work. I mean, they really took a giant pile of paper and made it into this book. And working with their design team and doing all of that was just such an intense process. Really cool, though. Overall, just marvelous. And then in 2019, we launched the book. And at the same time, one of Artemisia's paintings was here at the Seattle Art Museum. And it was a painting, another version of one of the famous gruesome Judith images. And that image is in Naples in the Capodimonte Museum. But that a bunch of work from that museum went on tour, including this one painting of Artemisia's. So it's this marvelous coincidence where that fall of 2019, we did, Fantagraphics and I did a ton of promotional work, and then I got to work with the museum and actually stand in front of one of the Artemisia paintings, and it was so cool. And then just to have that painting there, and then there were a bunch of pieces in that show that were basically by Artemisia's peers. So it was basically like an Italian Renaissance dream. And I was able to kind of help the museum, work to kind of make some of this stuff a little more accessible. And I actually drew comics for the museum, which was pretty great to have comics hanging at Seattle Art Museum with oil painting. And I know that you guys who are painters and illustrators and comics artists can understand how exciting that is to have this art form that's traditionally a low art form, right? Paired with what is traditionally this high art form. So cool. It was like a dream come true. And then I had a whole book tour lined up for 2020, and there was a whole show of Artemisia's work in London at the National Gallery scheduled for 2020. It was going to be 35 of her paintings, and her paintings were all over the world. But this goes, killed all of it. COVID killed all of it. So I'm slowly kind of coming back to Artemisia and starting to talk about Artemisia, but the relevancy of her story just grows and grows and grows. And the book is selling really well overall. It's doing really well. People are still really interested and really want to know more about Artemisia. And since I started, more and more people know who she is. Like, she's kind of blown up. And especially with the Me Too movement and all of that stuff, she's getting more and more well known, and there's so much more information coming out about her all the time. There's this whole scholarly world that's happening, and it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, one of the things I was struck by when I was reading the book is how you really get a sense of how the other painters that were peers that we still remember now from the sort of hagiographic would get being essentially like rock stars at the time. Somebody that, like, you don't pull any punches with Caravaggio in the book. And it's funny, like, how you can study Caravaggio and, look at his paintings and everything. And he's the great master who introduced this certain kind of, rendering. But then you actually like dig into his life and it's like, oh man, he really died on a beach being dropped off by a ship on the way. I mean, it's nutty. And somebody like Artemisia, who, it's immensely, intense reading, but our record of her is court records, right? Because that's the thing that was actually preserved. She didn't have a hagiographic, biographer following her around and, propping up her story. But when you actually see the art, you realize that, like, obviously she didn't need any of those things. It's just that's the extra step that keeps people, people of later decades engaged or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, she and Caravaggio, just like, rock stars now, kind of went in and out of fame and popularity throughout their lives. But yeah, Yeah, the main sources are definitely like court records, and wills, you know,
Mm.
and letters sometimes. Artemisia, we actually do have letters from Artemisia. And so there are, written documents for her. And, we know more about her and Caravaggio than a lot of other artists. But yeah, there's a lot of mystery to it and a lot of really intense shit
Right.
too, of course. That's part of it, the intensity.
Carson,
Yeah,
when we were talking about the book earlier, pre recording, you had mentioned that your sort of appreciation for her really grew reading the book. What was your sort of
yeah. I
trans?
mean, I was gonna make an admission that makes myself look like an asshole, but that's okay. Um, I've heard of Artemisia, and I've only ever seen the one painting, the Judith slain Holofernes, and I've seen this, and it's like, I've seen the scholarship and stuff, like, trying to bring her up as someone worthy of attention, but all I ever see was this one painting, and it kind of looks like the Caravaggio, and that was my impression going in. It's like, it's interesting case study of like because I remember being in classes and they're like, well, why are we only talking about guys? And it's like, well, it's a bummer historical fact that women just weren't really allowed to do this, and so these are the guys that made the influence. And then you get someone like this, but I still had that mindset of like, well, I don't know, all I know is that she kind of ripped off this one Caravaggio painting in my mind, and then reading this book, it was like, oh Jesus, okay, there's just all of this stuff has been suppressed. And so this book, your book, Gina, was the education to me that was like, oh man, like I want to go see all these, and actually like looking up, because you do so many drawings of the paintings. By the way, I thought this was pencil, so even more mind blown to know it's ballpoint pen. But seeing all of the paintings and the compositions, um and really thinking about it not from like the technical standpoint, because I haven't seen the paintings in person, but from a compositional standpoint, I think her stuff is better. I think it's more intense, you know the emotions that she gets into the same painting and stuff. So this book really, like, it kind of scolded me in a way I needed to be scolded, and got me way more interested in her.
Yeah, really fantastic. And I was intrigued by the copying of the oil painting in ballpoint pen, and that is sort of a hook. I think the three of us are probably don't need to be convinced that that is a valid art practice, because I know all three of us individually have engaged in that as a practice, as in copying something as exactly as you can, and even flipping the medium and stuff. But I would be curious if you were talking to someone who doesn't have an idea of what that benefits, would you be able to sort of elucidate, like, what does it mean to copy a great work of art?
Well, it's a really old tradition, that goes back hundreds of years, and that's how artists learned back in Artemisia's time during the Renaissance. You would copy the old masters. That's how you learned. And I did a little bit of that when I was at art school. I went to Pacific Northwest College of Art in Portland, and it's changed a lot over the years. But when I went there, in the early 2000s, there was definitely like a kind of an old school fine art practice, and especially because I was in their oil painting program, especially, you're tapping into these very old traditions, and same with oil painting, which is one of the reasons I love oil painting, is it's just, there is just something really powerful about tapping into something that people have been doing for hundreds and hundreds of years, largely with, the medium has, of course, changed, but in some ways, but not in a lot of ways. But then, copying Artemisia's paintings into the book was just totally mind-blowing, wonderful experience, because, you're staring at the work for hours and hours and hours, and you're really meditating on the work, and then when you're really staring at it for hours and hours, things come up, things come up that you didn't know were there. And so, it's really just such a calming, cathartic, mind-blowing experience to really look and stare at those paintings for a long, long time. It's really um just awesome. I love it. I'm really addicted to it. It's fun.
It seems like
And
you
that,
get an intimacy with it that
Yeah.
is unusual. Carson, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
But I think it's that intense looking that you did that started selling me on the compositional stuff I was talking about. There's one page that I had kind of put a sticky note on as 132, 133, where you have the Judas slain Holofernes, but then you're piecing off different pieces, and like you have her grabbing the sword handle, but it almost becomes phallic, and like you're putting that with the text, and by isolating different pieces, you kind of break down the hidden symbolic meaning in the painting. And so I think your intense study then allowed you to illuminate that work for me in a way that was really, really powerful.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the one I flagged is 53, and it doesn't have the same panel by panel breakdown. But I thought this was a very interesting one, and you actually explicitly talk in the text about what you were figuring out about this compositionally as you were doing it, including things like the cold stone bench that she's sitting on and things like that. And I'm not saying that people who don't draw can't see, but I think if you don't draw, you don't really know the difference. And that intense like copying, I mean, I don't know, I really gravitated to that segment of the book. It seemed like that was a really uh, intriguing case study about sort of like the
yeah.
critical value of that type of slow analysis.
Yeah, and it's also just on a practical level, you're trying to design something cohesive, trying to add photos of the imagery in there, it wouldn't have fit. It wouldn't have been cohesive, and then it would have been like a nightmare trying to get permission. With the ballpoint pen, you can kind of just build the whole page up gradually, almost like when you're building up a painting, there's connections in that process there. And then what I've talked about a lot, but I'll say again, is comics is such a marvelous medium for this, because one of my main goals was to sort of put Artemisia into the context of her time and place. I didn't want to just kind of project everything onto her. I really wanted to do a deep dive and try and figure out what actually happened to her, instead of kind of like using her story as like a jumping off point for like my own stuff. I really wanted to really commit to historical accuracy and to put her in the context of her time and place, rather than sort of pulling her out of context into our and like projecting our stuff onto her. So comics is perfect for that, because at the page you can see one of her paintings, but then you can also see on the page what was going on maybe in her life, but then also socially and politically. So you can literally see the painting in context on the page.
Right. Yeah, and I was intrigued that you just brought up, your earlier work with Summertime, and I named it for that was comics based as well, because one of the things that I was interested in to see this sort of trajectory. Like, I literally, by the way, I heard about this book because I was like, I wonder what Gina's doing, and I typed your name in a little bar. And there pops this, and I was like, oh, right, she's making comics, and it's interesting to look at your sort of path, because the zine, correct me, what was the name of, you had like 6 issues of it, right?
So what?
What was it called?
Well, the zine was like, so what, that I had
So what?
issues.
Okay.
But then before Summertime, I did one called The Roaming Heart too.
Okay. Gotcha. Maybe that's the one I'm thinking of. But what specifically what I remember is that the one prior to that was autobiographical, in the sense that you had your own name on there and everything like that. And then Summertime obviously is researched, but is through a fictive lens. That you're synthesizing all these things into a narrative that is, and you had a specific time period that Summertime took place in, and it seems like this is a very natural progression for you. Where you have taken and synthesized all of these other different elements in an attempt to make a narrative about a thing that you really enjoy. So I need to learn how to phrase these things as questions. I really do. This is something
I'm following. Yeah, good.
I mean, maybe it's the type of project that seems inevitable once you get there. But how did you get there? Like, what's the connective tissue for you other than your just enjoyment of it? Was it just being in front of the painting and being like, this thing right here? Why is nobody talking about this thing?
Well, I think it all kind of comes back to survival for me. I'm doing the work that I need to do to survive. And, um, you know, comics is kind of like my safe space. I just don't have a lot of space to talk about some of these really intense kind of interpersonal issues that are also social and political issues as well.
Right.
So, I just channel it all into my art, all that really intense stuff that I'm dealing with. Um, it really helps, when you can just channel it into the drawing board every day, coming back to it every day, every day, every day. It's just really what I need to survive. And I think for Artemisia, I think I had the first initial reaction that a lot of women have, which is you're looking at the Judith painting and because I learned about Artemisia first in art school. She's like the one woman painter in the Western art tradition.
Her and Mary Cassatt, right?
Yeah, she's like, and they've come a long way. Things have gotten better. But
Yeah.
I graduated in 2007, and she was still, one of the only women painters from that time period, especially. Now we know that there were actually lots of women painters. There were many of them, and there were pockets. There were areas where there were more of them. There were areas where patrons were more, and there was debates about early modern feminism. There was, feminist scholars are really doing this incredible work, to try and give us a bigger picture of the Renaissance. But going back to my initial interest and my initial response to Artemisia's work, it was similar in that you're seeing this Judith painting and that the artist has been assaulted sexually. And you're looking at this work and you're wondering, am I looking at a survivor using their work to transcend the pain of this trauma? You're looking at it and you're like, am I looking at an early example from hundreds of years ago of someone, before there was, a sort of political feminist movement? There was like proto-feminism. But anyway, you're looking at that work and there's nothing else like it in the Western art world either. Obviously Caravaggio really paved the way for that kind of heightened realism, right? And the Counter-Reformation and all these things led to Artemisia doing what she did. But still, you're looking at this work and you've never seen anything like it. And you're wondering if there's an autobiographical component to it. So I think it was just me, starting there and just being like, what happened? Like, what is this story? And then quickly realizing too that it's going to be a beast, so that's why it took me a while to get to a point where I could really get serious about doing the research to be done. But it also spiraled into something bigger. I figured, I was like, it'll be a year for each part. 1 year for the first part, another year for the second part, 3 years, here I am like 8-10 years later, still working on it, in the sense that I'm still promoting it and giving talks and like still kind of bringing that world to people. So it's pretty great. I don't know, maybe that sort of answers the question.
No, yeah.
Well, the other thing that when I was reading the book, just from a practical standpoint, that boggled my mind, it was the research, because it's not just like you said, you didn't want to just tell her story. You really put like context, that like all the political, this was going on in this country. How did you organize all of that? Like Post-it cards, or what was that process?
It's just a huge mess. And we actually did a little display of some of the process stuff at Fantagraphics. It was really fun. But I'm kind of weird in my comic building techniques, because I really start with words and language. So I do most of the writing first. Well, of course, like I said, I took time off to just read books. and to try and absorb it. Because the thing is, if when you're drawing comics about something, you gotta know it enough to really be able to talk about it and draw it. So you gotta know it. So I really just read a lot of books to try and not only learn about it, but just absorb it. And then the other thing that's worth mentioning is the notes section.
Mhm.
I think, in hindsight too, the book is really the product of me feeling pretty disillusioned with like our sort of like quick fix, short attention span, social media, reactionary world that we're in right now. I wanted to show what research looks like and to show
Mhm.
people what it looks like when you really do a deep dive into something. And I think I wanted to just be totally transparent too about, the stuff that I invented, and then the stuff that there's documentary sources for it, you know.
Right. Even down to the lettering, which I thought was a really intriguing choice, where all the text that's represented as spoken dialogue comes from transcripts of some type is a combination of uppercase and lowercase, whereas the invented dialogue is all uppercase. Sorry to intrude.
Yeah, no, I was going to mention that too. Yeah, I want people to understand all the choices that I made, because there's a lot of books and stuff about Artemisia. There's a French movie about her. It's horrible, by the way, and very controversial. It came out, gosh, I think it came out maybe in the 90s. But anyway, there's a lot, and there's like a young adult novel. There's a play. There's been multiple plays. There was multiple novels about her, but I wanted to have it be historically accurate. Again, I didn't want to just use her story as like a fun jumping off point for some sort of fictionalized narrative. I really wanted to like show the audience like, here's where Gina's voice came in. You're sort of stringing the facts together, with fiction, which actually my favorite novel about Artemisia is by Alexandra Lapierre. And that was kind of what she did, but just with fiction and writing. And she's got a big notes section in her book too, and where she talks about, here's the documentary evidence versus here's what I made up, because of that lack, those holes, right, in the information. And the more I think about it, I feel like women and minorities and queer people and people of color, it's harder to find our histories. You have to dig deeper. There's less documentary evidence, right? Because most women couldn't read or write.
Right.
So it's harder to find our stories. And so a lot of times there has to be an element of fiction, because our voices have been erased, so now in hindsight, looking back on the project and looking at other comments, and also thinking about this things like the 1619 project, that scholars, and especially minority scholars, like, for lack of a better term, right, some of the new information that these people are trying to gather, it's just harder to get that information. And so we really are like guessing and conjecturing and, trying to use our creative energy to fill in those gaps.
And you combine that with survivorship bias, the tendency for something that is there still to be the thing that gains more prominence, and you really have a quite weird situation. I've thought about that a lot in relationship to the sort of arts and crafts, which was the predominant way that women were able to be involved in the fine arts, and those two things being separated from each other is not there's a reason for that, but the fact of it is that if you spent your life basket weaving, those baskets aren't going to survive you, because the baskets are made of reed, and reed decays, and oil paint happens to be something that survives and continues on. which obviously is not totally relevant in this in this situation. But
No,
the survivorship.
it's connected. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
But one of the things that I was intrigued by, sort of thinking about it, your first scene with Artemisia's father actually visiting the Caravaggio at night and sort of having this worshipful, and he's in awe of it, and not in a totally positive way either, but like a oh shit, I'm outmoded kind of way, is the lack of access that people have had at various times to the paintings. And around the same time, and a little bit before that, is when the public really had access to images of paintings for the first time, and there would be metal engraving copies of those that could be widely distributed and could be bought by families. And so some version of that image, and it just seemed like the connection to comics is too tasty. Here you've got narrative painting that is made for the rich person who's going to lock it away in their castle or in their their church, and then you have the distillation of that narrative painting sort of escaping out. And then here you've got a book that has an actual narrative that is derived from some of those same kinds of techniques that are I don't know. I'm grateful to live in the period that we live in, and not the period that she lived in. I guess that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, although it's one of those things, when you look back, you see how different things were, but then you also see how the same everything is too, in like a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Especially with the trial, it's like people are still asking survivors the same stuff, like on trial. It's crazy, like how little has changed in a lot of ways. But yes, I mean, I is in a lot of ways, yes, of course, I'm grateful to not be in Artemisia's world in some ways. I mean, I don't want to wear corsets. I'd be dressed as a guy. I'd be like those courtesans, right? A lot of times, like the sex workers were the women that could actually engage with men on any kind of intellectual level. A lot of times, and a lot of times they would like dress in men's clothing and go out.
Yeah,
that's where I would be. I'd be like in the doublet, and the hose. I wouldn't be wearing the corset. Anyway, sorry. That was a tangent, I guess.
The trial scene is the one that like made it a bigger story for me. Like that's where her story breaks open. And I mean, we talked about it before jumping on air, that we'd set this up a while ago, but then it's kind of timely now with what happened with Roe v. Wade getting overturned. But looking at the legal system, it was so intense to me to be like, here she is claiming that she was sexually assaulted, raped, and then they're making her go through these just terrible, like these women that are checking her to make sure that she's actually been deflowered, and then they put her in these are like the two main pages that I had put sticky notes on. They like tie her fingers in these like torture device, and that's like their lie detector machine. But then they didn't do it to the guy. They just like take his word at face value without torturing him. Those are so intense. And so I am interested, especially given what's just happened, like your perspective on, how much that really has changed. And you just said, survivors still have to go through these kind of crazy hurdles to even get their story told.
Yeah, I mean, it just is just such a it just is an extremely like misogynist world. And I actually talked about this a lot for the interview I did for the Frick. So if you want to hear more of Gina getting into the history of this torture, you can also listen to me there. But yeah, the right kind of torture for Artemisia's like social status, and then another one of the, basically what I said too for the Frick was just it's like now. I mean, it's like the court system is completely class-based.
Yeah.
So wealthy people are not wealthy, powerful white men are just not accountable at all. So another, and I brought up the fact that Artemisia was tortured with, the sabille. I don't know how to pronounce it, sabile, um, which is like a finger apparatus. It was really hard to research it. I did a lot of work trying to figure out about torture. Artemisia's torture was like considered appropriate for her class and status. And then one of Agostino Tassi, the perpetrator, one of his servants was tortured as well. Niccolo Badino was hoisted by his shoulders. So because he was a servant, So, and I also brought up the fact that it just seems so crazy, but when you're really living in that, when you're really researching that world for a long time, for years, you kind of get used to it, and it's not as shocking as it is to people who are first like looking at it. And this is like a world where women's sexuality is just automatically suspect, and that is terrifyingly close to what we're seeing right now, where our sexuality is just automatically suspect. And it's really scary stuff, but this is what the powerful elite have been doing for so long,
Yeah, and when you said that about the class divisions, I mean, that's the thing that was just really striking to me. And this is not a new point. None of us are making this point for the first time, but the see what you say about the legal arguments about the federal decision that was just made by a bunch of judges. That setting aside the legal arguments, from a practical standpoint, rich people are going to be able to continue to act exactly how they are, how they want to. People that don't have the class issues are going to be able to just continue however they want. And you can sort of see how they segmented out class in a different kind of way than our society has, but the privilege that goes along with class is like obviously glaringly similar. And in fact, the thing that this first horrific scene that you have with the beheadings in the public square and everything, the thing that people are outraged by is the fact that it's a bunch of high class people that have been beheaded.
Yes. Yeah, they were a rich family. That was why it was so sensational at the time. Yeah. And I mean, it's important, when you're trying to get into the mindset of people years ago,
Right.
you have to remember that, like, this is a world with no electricity, so it's super dark, and the world where people are like slaughtering their own animals, where people die like really easily. Half of children are not going to make it to adulthood. They were dealing, especially, in Naples, with big natural disasters. There's the giant volcano. So, Artemisia's life was drastically affected by the plague multiple times. This was a world where, and this is before the Enlightenment. So really, the church is really dictating people's response. People were praying about it. People were surviving whatever ways they can, but people are surviving surrounded in high levels of violence right now in all kinds of places in the world. But the other thing I like to bring up too is, especially in regards to the trial, it's hard in our super individualistic society that we have to understand the sort of communal family clan atmosphere of the Italian Renaissance. Our mindset is very like, I'm responsible for me. It's all about me. I'm just responsible for me. But that's just not how it worked. In the early modern time, it was very family and clan oriented. If you were of a certain class, you would have your family crest, and there were like honor, codes of honor. That's also hard for us to sort of empathize with now, but the men, Artemisia's father and brothers were absolutely responsible for her. Upholding honor for men, would have to deal with your career, your guild, right? Your trade, your craft, money, status, wealth, how well you could fight and duel and protect the women in your life. Honor for women meant just chastity. That's it. That's it. It's just chastity. So for Artemisia, thinking about the trial, basically at that time, the only way to sort of right this wrong, basically, Artemisia's prospects on the marriage market were hindered because it sounds really awful, but she was basically considered like damaged goods, which her father, that hurt his name and his career. And it hit it had the impact on their whole family unit and structure. And so basically, this rapist, this perpetrator, was essentially expected to either marry her, would sort of repair the damage because she was damaged goods, right? Her prospects for marriage were like lowered, right? So either, he was expected to either marry her or pay the dowry. And the dowry is like a sum of money that that the father woman and her new family, her new protectors,
Right.
and so it was also sort of like an inheritance, right?
Sort of.
It was a huge, and dowry inflation was huge, and so we could see Artemisia then struggling later to gather enough money for dowries for her own daughters, right? So daughters were an expensive liability essentially at that time. So daughters would make money go away from the family, right? Whereas a son would bring money into the family. So it's just a completely misogynist patriarchal culture, like from the ground up.
When you're working on it and you're like, the book is like has your viewpoint from now, but you're also very aware of those contextual things like that, like the kind of relative nature of morality, between societies. Like, this is just the situation they got and this is how they formulated their morality. How do you balance those kinds of considerations against the more like absolute, like, well, this just obviously absolutely wrong?
It's hard, I had to work on that narration, the narrator voice. And I worked with an editor named Jason Conger who helped me a lot. You kind of have to let the audience decide. You kind of have to just write it and tell it and not, sort of proselytize too much. You have to just let the audience kind of figure it out. And there's so much information. I really, the editor I worked with, we would pass drafts of it back and forth, and him just being like, no, Gina, no, writing, no. Like, I had to take Gina out of it. I made that decision, right? Where at the beginning, where I was like, okay, how is this narrator's voice going to work? Is this going to be Gina? Is this going to be more scholarly? It ended up being more scholarly, that narrator's voice.
It seems to me that one of the advantages of the really deep understanding that you got of this society, and I don't say that lightly. I mean, it really seems like you have completely absorbed the available information. It seems that you've avoided something that I see as like one of the major pitfalls of. I would say there are two major pitfalls of something that's attempting to be historic. One is to pretend that everybody's the exact same as they are now and behave differently, or behave the same and think the same. And two is the assumption that so many people make is that people or ignorant or somehow less than people of today. And it seems to me that those two things balanced against each other is really where it is, where there's this common kind of humanity, and common set of problems and common set of conflicts, but at the same time acknowledging the sort of uniqueness of the cultural situation that people were in. And it seems to me that you really struck that balance there. So to frame it as a question this time, were people stupid before? Did they used to be stupid?
Well, there's a lot we don't know too. There's just so much
Right.
we don't know. But no, I mean, of course not. I've actually argued that I thought that Artemisia was actually a genius and a polymath and like the opposite of, and it's like it's amazing. We're looking at the Judas stuff. That's like a teenager painted that. It's like, what was I doing when I was 19? I wasn't painting like that. You pick a trade, at that time, and you devote yourself to that. You learn from an old master, unless you're a woman, and then, you don't really get to do anything unless you're like in Artemisia's case, where there's men in your world that can share knowledge. And it's pretty special thinking about Artemisia's stamina and drive in that world, but then also thinking about the men that got behind her, and she learned from her father. We know that they had a pretty stormy relationship, but he obviously was willing to push for her and open doors for her. And we can see too from her letters, she had she had lots of people helping her, but like, it's also, again, just like now, the letters are like, just like our starving artist letters that we do now. It's like, hey, can I do this work for you? I'm starving. Like, hey, I've got a kid. I really need you to give me that commission. Hey, this is kind of the same stuff. I don't know. Maybe that was a tangent too. What was the question?
No, no, that's.
You asked me if people were stupid. I'm like, no.
No, she was obviously good at self-promotion, and like had to have been extremely charismatic, I imagine, is kind of the picture that you get. Like she had, I mean, there can't be much evidence about it, but I mean, is that your impression, is that she had to have been charismatic?
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of what it feels like to be a woman drummer.
I was going to ask you, yeah.
You get this extra attention, because people don't see it every day. It's still sort of outside the norm enough. But then with that extra attention comes all kinds of struggle, and as the minority, you always feel like you have to prove yourself, right? And so that causes, these scenarios where women have to work twice as hard, to kind of prove themselves and just push beyond. So I think it's similar to that. I think there's a lot of like poetry that men were writing about her patrons. The thing too is she was really hot, she was really hot and was capitalizing on that too, and there's this whole, but also it's important to note that there's this whole scholarly world that's happening right now where people are arguing and debating about all of this stuff. Once you start doing this research, the same handfuls of scholars pop up. These are like social historians, art historians, feminist historians, everybody's doing this research and arguing about who these people were and how they interacted. And things have changed about what we know about Artemisia and her world and her business that she was basically running. The information has changed even just since my book has come out. So there's a lot of debate about it. But yeah, there's this whole like self-fashioning, right? Which is the same as now. Everybody wants a picture of me for all my talks. Everyone wants photos of me. They want to see me. They want, it's self-fashioning. You have to, unfortunately, and especially You know, if you're a woman, it's like you got to be hot, you know, for all this stuff. It's like you're always being sexualized, you know. It's just exhausting. It's just exhausting, especially as a musician, as a drummer, especially when you're like in the minority. You know, you're just, it's always like sexy, sexy, sexy. And so that's what Artemisia was up against too. And you can see it in the, you know, all of her patrons, you know, especially in Venice, you know, in different pockets, you know, where they're writing this poetry about her, you know, the marvelous hand of the beautiful woman painter. You know, her beauty is the same beauty as the paintings. And, you know, this is what her patrons were expounding on, you know. And I think that, you know, for a lot of us, you have to sort of capitalize on that stuff, but then there's a burden to it as well. And so I think, you know, and I think, you know, Artemisia was seen as sort of the exception too. You know, there's this sort of exceptionalism thing that, you know, I think about hearing this, you're not like other women, you're not like other girls, you're not like other women, hearing that. I think Artemisia heard that too, you know, and you sort of capitalize on that. But now we've got these waves of the feminist movement, and feminism seeks to not have these exceptional cases, but rather to lift up all of us, right? So that we can have some sense of equality instead of just the beautiful exception. You know, this happens, you know, of course, in a racial sense, absolutely as well. You know, the tokenism, the exceptionalism. You know,
Is
Yeah,
it
and
is it
one of the
difficult
things
though
that,
from sorry, go ahead, Sean.
and you see it when there's a certain cachet. You know, the moment that we're in right now, it seems that tokenism is an accepted part of doing business, and especially businesses are very eager to, you know, have their pride flag up on their target ad for like a 1 week period, and then they're like, ah, we did it, we got through it, you know. And if you are a poor person who is in exceptional circumstances and, you know, are able to get hired on for something like a, you know, I mean, why not take advantage of that? But then you're the token person representing this for this corporation that otherwise doesn't give a shit about it. It's a difficult position to be in. It's very interesting. I hadn't even considered the drummer aspect of it. Rachel and I used to call it, my wife Rachel and I used to call it the performing monkey thing, you know. And you get the attention of doing that one thing that you're doing that nobody else does, and you got to capitalize on that moment and then develop it into something else, because otherwise people remember, oh, but it's still a monkey, right? That's you get the exception for being able to do it, but then you're back to doing it, and you still got that label going.
yeah, and there's a whole lot of like, honey, baby, sweetheart, let me fix your gear, let me borrow your gear, let me look at your gear, let me adjust your gear, let me, you know. So I think Artemisia was totally dealing with that as well. You know, let me look, let me, you know, there's controversy about paintings being altered and adjusted, and, you know, there's all this controversy about that as well.
Well, and that was pretty common practice. We've talked about that with that Vermeer that got restored, you know, where someone had just like decided to get rid of that and they just painted a wall over a painting. That was pretty common. But so you were talking about there's the risk of elevating the exception, it being, maybe there's a risk of like diminishing the whole though. And so in a project like this, how did you balance that out as well? Because Artemisia has been like, okay, here's the exceptional woman painter, but then you're like trying to use that as a tool to open up research into these other pockets that you're talking about. What's like the tightrope there, do you think, if there is one?
Say it again.
You were talking about like you don't want to just treat her as an exception and just celebrate her as an exception, because that does damage to like the rest of the body of women in general, and that you're only treating people as exceptions.
Okay.
And so how do you balance the fact that she is historically kind of exceptional with that larger?
I mean, I think it's a lot of it, honestly, is like looking at things from an intersectional perspective as well, and using intersectional feminism where you're looking at the whole context and you're looking at the different levels of I guess oppression, for lack of a better word, that are overlapping and all happening simultaneously, and sort of acknowledging all of that. And I think it's like trying to move away from like hero worship to where you know, we can have Artemisia as like this feminist icon, but we also have to talk about the fact that we know she was really shitty to her servants, right? So there's a class, right? Looking at Artemisia in an intersectional light and seeing that she just was such an amazing, powerful woman, but there were these things that were really horrible and shitty about her too. And we can't just see her as this flawless superhuman. We have to see human beings for what they are, and not just build her up as some perfect superhero. You know, this isn't like Marvel. Yeah, actually, I don't even want to go there. Actually, maybe that was what Alan Moore was trying to do, right? Is like you bring a little nuance to these characters, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to just make superheroes. You want to show, you know, that people are not you know, gonna be perfect all the time. And you know, and you know, honestly, Artemisia was probably like a militant Catholic. You know, she was probably completely racist, like everyone, like a lot of people in her time and place. But you know, that's a lot of that stuff's in the notes too. You know, because I just couldn't get into so much of this controversy in the body of the work, and it's already a pretty wordy book, which I realized it was wordy, and that a lot of people weren't gonna like that. And it was like, okay, I'm making a wordy comic, so there.
Well,
But
I actually,
to the notes.
that's something I wanted. I didn't have a question. I just wanted to compliment you on, is that as a reader myself, I am pretty prone to like, oh Jesus, I'm reading a comic and this page is like almost all writing, and like I'm prone to checking out. But you had a really good, and that was part of what I was so impressed with all this research you did. There seemed to be a good ebb and flow of like, here's the dense text pages, and then now I get dialogue for like 10 pages. And I was just really, there's no question there, I was just really impressed by the balance of that, and it kept me engaged as someone who will typically be like, I'm not reading a novel, why are there so many words?
Yeah, your ability to avoid the sort of you know, putting her on a pedestal or whatever, and you know, using the sort of intersectional, you know, principles of analyzing it from all these different levels really made me think about you know, that first poll that I was talking about before of like most historic stuff, just pretending that everybody acted and thought the same way. And you know, you can imagine this being made into a movie in which she's palling around with her servants, and they're like pushing a baby carriage together, and she's confiding in them, and she's like helping them, like, hey, you know, the cook is really hot to trot for you. You know what I mean? It's just it is admirable and refreshing to read something that treats you know, treats people as Marines who really lived in the place that they lived in. So bravo. What are you working on now, Gina? What's the plan?
Well, it's been really crazy. You know, it's been crazy just adjusting to like not pouring everything into this graphic novel. Like it's been just really hard switching gears away from, you know, this project that just sort of grew into my baby. You know, I was like letting my baby go. But I've done a little bit of painting, and then I'm also doing kind of what I am calling essay comics. So I'm doing like some shorter pieces that I can hopefully kind of put together into a book eventually. But like working on like 10, you know, I did in 2020, I did like a 10-page segment on the Black Lives Matter movement and my relationship with that movement, and writing about James Baldwin a lot, and touching on, I started writing about Black Lives Matter and just writing about my favorite Black artists and writers and making comics about that. Maybe I should show one of those pages.
Yeah, we'd love to see it. Absolutely. We're getting previews here.
A world exclusive.
So just working on some smaller things. I have tons of projects I want to do, and I want to go back to the Italian Renaissance eventually. Like, I'm not done with that world, but the goal is to get a little more support before I do it again. Like,
Yeah.
I just have been working so hard at day jobs, making no money for so long. And I would really like to be able to go actually travel and do research. So I'm not just relying on secondary sources for everything. Like, that's the dream. Like, I have another project that deals with the Italian Renaissance that I could pretty much spend all my 40s on. Like, if I just could find some way to get some support from it for it, it would be so cool to travel and do research. So that's kind of the dream.
Are there grants or like a Fulbright scholarship or something like that?
I don't know. Like, I'm trying to research, and Fantagraphics is trying to help me to just do some research at some of those gigs. So we'll see what I can kind of come up with. I need to like build a website. I need to be online more. I need to work on all that stuff.
Don't do it.
But
somebody do it for you.
Anyway,
two things that I would look into would be a Fulbright scholarship, if you can identify an institution in Italy that would host you, and then a creative capital grant. You could get up to $50,000.
Wow. Okay. Actually, I'm going to write this down. So you said Fulbright and you said creative capital?
Yeah, Fulbright should be pretty much a yearly thing. And what you have to do is you have to find the Fulbright? Okay.
Yeah. But the creative capital?
Creative capital, you have to land it right because it cycles like every 3 years. Like 1 year it's more focused on theater, and 1 year it's more focused on music, and the third year. But it's a huge deal. It's a big grant writing thing, but with backing from Fantagraphics and with kind of the cultural relevancy of it all, I think it would have a good chance. And you can get up to 50,000 at least. It may have increased since then.
I just need to be doing more of that kind of stuff so I can keep trying to like open doors for myself. But let me see. I'm trying to figure out which page to show you. But like, here's an example of like, sorry, this isn't professional. I could always like scan stuff and show it to you. Maybe I should just do that. This isn't very legit.
It's cool.
I'll blow you up on the screen so you're more.
Oh, you know what? If I turn myself vertical again, that could help.
Yeah.
Complicated. Edit this out. I don't know. I mean, maybe I should just scan them and send it to you.
Yeah, if you scan them and send them, I'll plop them into the video for sure.
Okay.
I'd love to see them.
Maybe we should do that. That might be more professional than me trying to like hold up stuff with my like shitty phone camera. I mean, it's just the usual struggle, right? I've always been really bad at the marketing and promotional side of it, but I need to open doors. Like I need some, I just need more support for this work,
Well, it seems like you're opening an avenue that I'm seeing more of, but not much, and not that's as well done as this, where it is scholarship. And when you're talking about writing short essays and articles, I think there's a really interesting avenue there for comics as scholarship, and not necessarily comics as scholarship about comics. And I don't know that world so well, but that might be another place, because it's a really fascinating thing that you've done with it.
Yeah, there's like, comics are such a great educational tool. And when they tried to censor Mouse, I feel like that was just proof of like how important comics are, and graphic novels. They're really important. They're really a great teaching tool. And in 2019, actually, Fantagraphics sent me to the American Librarians Association. you know, so I got to talk to like librarians from all over the country and like try and give them my book and talk about using comics for education. And I've had like some teaching gigs kind of come up. Like maybe I could be doing more of that. Like, you know, trying to think about, yeah, using comics for education. Yeah, I'm all about it. Something's got to give, you know. I'm hoping if I just keep doing this, doors will kind of start opening up again. I was gonna, yeah, I mean, I had some stuff kind of coming up in 2020, but hopefully again I can kind of resurrect some of that stuff.
Well, Gina, if you ever want to tour Italy as a bucket drumming duo, let me know.
Ah!
We can store our stuff inside the buckets, on the buckets, and we'll just walk from town to town, and then dump our stuff out. And there's the bucket. We're all set. Take the photos that you need for the research. You know, hit up all the libraries, and off we go.
Yeah, there you go. Sign me up. Sounds good.
And Gina,
Awesome.
I'm gonna have to send you a video I saw of a female drummer like just last week. Like as soon as you started talking about that, I just came across it and I was like, oh, okay, now I've got to send it to you, because it's exactly what you're talking about, where she's just like so over sexualizing herself, and she's got like two other like strippers dancing in front of the drum set, and we're just like, oh my God, what are you doing?
Well, like, it's tough, right? Because like, you know, I think what this world requires of us is really just thinking and feeling different contradictory things at the same time.
Yeah.
You know, because like you want to be sexy. You know, Artemisia wanted to be
Appealing,
sexy
yeah.
times. There's even paintings of her where she's painting herself with like hella cleavage. So it's like we have like a sexuality, but like you want to have agency over that, you know. So it's like you want to be sexy, but you don't want to be sexualized all the time. You want to have some control over how people are perceiving you, you know. So it's like, again, you're just thinking contradictory things at the same time, you know. So it's not like, and like rock music is sexual too, you know, that rock music is sexual, but people are not telling my bandmates like, you're so sexy after we get off stage. They're not telling my that. They're testing, you know. So it's like it's complicated, you know. It's not. I think that's like my goal with almost everything, is just to show the nuance and complexity and just get away from like reactionary black and white thinking. Is to just kind of like show the complexity of all of these issues, you know.
Awesome. Well, your book does a stunning job of doing that. And go ahead, Carson.
I was gonna say, yeah, like that's what, you know, that's what made this a great book, and that's the kind of stuff that I'm looking for too, because I'm sick of the kind of one punch, you know, like knockout kind of stories, and they don't look at like the fact that the hero is also a piece of shit, and the piece of shit is also a hero in certain moments. And
yeah.
Right. Yeah, I was not that I feel like I'm just gonna derail us again, but yeah, the little moments you spend time praising her attacker's abilities in rendering environments, and how valuable a skill that would have been. And I was just like, that right there, that's the thing. You know what I mean? Because it's true. He's a person. You know, he's not just a monster, and he might have also been a monster, but he's also a person. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, he visited her in prison too. There's that whole sequence where he visits her, and there is love between them. You know, a lot of survivors really do love their perpetrators in all kinds of ways. Yeah. So there's that whole complicated thing, you know, that, you know, again, is different back then, but in some ways, just this is the same stuff, you know, that we're grappling with. But anyway.
Well, thank you so much for talking to us about the book today, Gina, and best of luck. If you guys are not, I Know What I Am, The Life and Times of Artemisia Gentileschi. I'm going to practice my accent a little bit. Gina, would you prefer that I say Siciliano or Siciliano? What do you think?
Your pronunciation's really good. It's like better than most. So no worries. You got yeah. I mean, my pronunciation isn't very good either. I don't know. Like my dad speaks Italian, so I'm sometimes like, how do I say this, Dad? Like I need to learn Italian probably at some
Dad,
point.
tell me about this torture device here.
Well, thank you so much, you guys. This has been really good.
Oh,
Where do I see this? Where do I see more? Where do I see more of what you guys are doing?
oh, well, right now in the Diamond catalog, you can order Carson Grubaugh's new 5-issue series. You heard it here first, The Abolition of Man, which is the first comic to be illustrated entirely by an AI computer.
And yeah, we won't say what the 5th issue is quite yet, but it does involve an Italian. So
Yeah, I'm gonna check it out. I'm gonna check
And
it out.
yeah, and if you haven't had picked up a copy yet, Strange Death of Alex Raymond is out now. And thank you guys for listening and watching this far. Really appreciate it. And first person to comment and mention this moment that I'm talking right now will get something in the mail if you live in the U.S. So comment and send me an email, and I'll get you something fun in the mail that is related to this conversation. And man, thanks, Gina. It's so great to catch up with you. And congratulations on the book. And I'm hoping we get to talk again soon. Maybe we can come have you back to talk about one of your favorite comics, if you're up for it.
Love that. Yeah, let's be in touch.
Excellent. And normally edit out, Carson, where I say goodbye like 50 times, right?
No, I like leaving that in there. I was also going to say, if people have other grant suggestions that Gina could take advantage of, put them in the
Oh yeah, send them my way.
yeah, put them in the comments, and we'll send them her way for sure.
Gina, if I may end on one last thing, your Black Flag T-shirt. The first drummer that I ever played with in a band named Mercy, the band was called Mercy Brown in Orlando. I thought he was the best drummer. I thought he had the most amazing fills in the world. And then he said, "We're going to go for a ride." And I got into his little Honda. It's not an Accord and not a Civic. It's somewhere between the two. And he drove me around. He said, "Hold on, I'm going to give you 7 minutes." And he put in a CD and he popped it to track number 2, as War Pigs. And I heard every single fill that he knew in the span of like a 7-minute song. Like there it was. I never thought of him the same way.
Punk rock.
And on the punk rock, we'll say.
All right.
All right, thanks everybody.
Have a marvelous day.
Bye.
Make sure to like, smash that subscribe button, and ring that bell.